For many years, the galaxy has lived under the tyrannical rule of the Galactic Empire. In an attempt to deal a strong blow to the Empire, a band of rebel forces tries to acquire key information about an Imperial battle station that is under construction. The good. I think this movie does a pretty good job of establishing who its characters are. And most of the main characters in this movie are pretty engaging or entertaining in some way, even if their personalities are rather simple. We get to see some different ways that people go about rebelling against the Empire through Saw Gerrera and Cassian Andor. And then we have a reprogrammed Imperial droid, K2SO, and he is just absolutely delightful and hilarious. Given that the story of this movie is a direct precursor to A New Hope, we get to see a version of the original trilogy era brought to life with modern movie-making technology. Visually speaking, that is just so cool. One of the biggest factors that benefits from this addition of modern technology is the action in this movie. Whether it be gun battles, space battles, or blind warrior Chirrut Imwe kicking a bunch of stormtroopers' asses with a stick, classic Star Wars plus modern technology equals a product that can show events that are, to quote George Lucas for a second, faster and more intense. This movie is a precursor to Episode 4, A New Hope, and I think it does a good job at complementing that film. It adds bits of background and details that give more context to not only what the era was like living under the Empire, but also details, especially a very particular one that the plot hinges on, that adds a whole new layer to the nature of A New Hope. It also pays homage to A New Hope by having a few cameos of characters from A New Hope. Some of these characters also appear in minor supporting roles in this movie, but when they do, they feel necessary and they don't feel like they're slowing down the movie. The cameos also don't feel intrusive. They're not getting in the way of anything. And that's precisely how fan service should be done. Lastly, the ending of this movie. A really exciting series of sequences. And it could be easily considered the highlight reel of this movie, especially for a few very particular, very satisfying moments.
The iffy.
Rogue One breaks with tradition a bit and does not begin the film with an opening crawl. I know they were trying to use this as a way to separate the spin-off films from the saga films, the ones that have episode in their title. And the way I see it, if you're familiar with Star Wars, you're not going to be lost. You're going to figure out where you are in the timeline of Star Wars and what's going on very quickly. Now, on the flip side, this being a very direct, very close precursor to A New Hope, if you understand what the plot of this movie is, you can also probably guess how it's going to end, and that may serve to reduce some elements of tension in this movie. Although I will say, I still had a really good time watching it. This movie starts off a bit on the slow side for pacing because it has to establish quite a few things during its first couple of acts. But I will say that as the movie progresses, it only keeps getting better and more interesting, and by the time you get to the ending, oh boy, you're in for a good time. I've come to realize that there are a ton of shots from trailers for this movie that are not in the final cut of the movie, which tells me that the reshoots that took place over the summer that everyone was making a big deal about were probably worth making a big deal about because it looks like it changed a lot of key elements about the film. It's going to be a very interesting bit of research if some of the footage that was cut from the movie makes it to the public eye at some point. CGI is used in this movie to replicate the physical appearance of some classic characters from the original trilogy. Now first I have to be honest about my initial reaction. I was like, holy cow, that looks just like them! And I gotta say, it's a neat bit of technology if they're able to do that so accurately. However, it's also very obvious that these are done in CG, and it gives you a bit of an uncanny valley effect when looking at them. It's just visually strange to behold. As most of you will know from the trailers, Darth Vader appears in this movie. Now first and foremost, do you like the character of Darth Vader? Then I think you're going to like what you see in this movie. The presentation, performance, and badassness that comes with the reputation of this character is very much present within the movie. There's just two quick things to talk about. One, Vader has a maximum of maybe 7 minutes of screen time in the entire movie. However, the screen time they did use was used very well. The second thing I want to talk about is the voice. Yes, it is still James Earl Jones doing the voice. However, since his primary performance as the character was about 30 years ago, I feel like James Earl Jones is somewhat out of touch with the very precise tone of voice that Darth Vader had back in that day. And even though it's still very deep and mesmerizing and sounds really cool, I feel like with just a little bit of guidance, James Earl Jones could hit that magic mark. I will admit though, in the grand scheme of things, this is a pretty minor complaint. I still think that the performance that he gives is really good. This is the second theatrical Star Wars release to not have a John Williams score. And yes, I said the second. I want to study it more, but from what I gathered in this movie, in some cases this score tries to emulate the style of John Williams, while in some cases also doing its own thing. But I also have to give massive props to the composer of this movie, because the original composer unfortunately had to drop out, and this composer came on a bit later into the project, and he only had 4 weeks to write the score. So all things considered, it came out pretty well.
The bad.
There's one character in the main cast that isn't much more than the role that they are given within the context of what the characters are doing in this movie. Which is unfortunate, but a little easier to forgive for the fact that the actor playing this character does give a good performance. There's a creature that appears near the beginning of this movie that is really weird. What this creature is and what it does just feels sort of out of place with everything else, and the effect that this creature is supposed to have by its presence doesn't even have a very long-lasting impact throughout the film. This movie turns one paragraph of the opening crawl from A New Hope into a movie. It adds details to a scenario that was previously just generalized. And I think the events of this movie are going to raise a couple of questions of how well these events mesh with A New Hope.
The verdict?
Although Rogue One did have a few notable weaknesses, it still felt like a satisfying Star Wars experience. I'm really glad that they chose to tell this particular story. Based on this, I'm ready for more Star Wars spin-off films. This is Detective Steve, and just for the record, the Bothans did not die to bring us this information. That was the second Death Star. This movie is about the first one. Are we clear?